it is on. Oh, okay. Instead of turning red when it's on, it turns green. Okay. The stock photo I sent in today to the media, I found this into my, so it looks like my eyes are closed.
Okay. I don't see anybody up there. Are we on? Okay. Should we just start? Oh, I guess they're seeing me over there. There we go. There we go. All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here today at the Portland Children's Levy Community Council. I'm Erica, she, her pronouns, and just a reminder that at our first meeting back in February, we were talked about doing land acknowledgements, and we're still kind of waiting for that guidance from the Government Office of Tribal Relations. And so they're supposed to have that by the end of the year, and then we will go back to doing that. First, to get our housekeeping items out of the way, in case you didn't notice or you're new here, technical difference. The bathrooms are at the front of the room through those double doors. There's an all-gender bathroom and then one for the gender of your choice each. And let's see, if you are attending in person today and you have a question, then you can just raise your hand. Or if you want to write down a question and give it to me on the break, we can do that as well. We usually have our question bank here and our sticky notes and some kind of fancy facilitator tools, and we're kind of going low tech today because we've had to pivot a little bit. We had a staff member be out sick at the last minute. So I can give some scratch paper if people need that, but you can write down questions if you have something that you want to bring up that we don't get to. If you are virtual and you have a question, you can use the raise hand function, or you can also chat Lisa, who's in the Zoom. This is Lisa. She is filling in for Meg today. And also she is, of course, our illustrious leader and bureau director. Okay. So let's see. So the next thing I'm going to do before we get started is to do introductions. And I'm going to ask our virtual participants to go first. And Jess, you can do your name and pronouns. I think that's all we're going to really need today. And just say hi and let us know who you are. So I will kind of call people in the order that is on my Zoom screen, which means that Lisa, you are first. If you can introduce yourself. Or if you're not ready, someone else can go first. How about Jamie? Can people on Zoom hear me? Something just changed. Okay.
Sorry, someone muted us in Zoom.
Oops. Lisa, do you?
If you have Zoom open in here, mute your computer, please.
Mute the computer.
It is muted.
Oh, yeah, it is. Lisa, do you? And then it was still echoing. Okay,
Computer was muted.
Sorry.
yeah.
It was
We
muted.
also have to mute the speaker, so can you go here? Sorry, I should have gave you guys a little rundown.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, that's my bad. I should have got to it before.
Okay. All right, so does anyone on Zoom want to introduce themselves? Like, be through the technical, we'll start here. We'll do in person first. Since it looks like we're having technical issues with the Themes engine. Amarachi, would you introduce yourself and your pronouns?
Hi, I'm Amarachi. Oh, sorry about that. Hi, I'm Amarachi. My pronouns are she, hers.
Great.
Hello, my name is Alex Sanchez. I use he, him, or they, them pronouns.
Hi there, Stephen Pham here. I use he, him pronouns.
Dean Salazar, he, him pronouns.
Alejandra Favela, she, ella pronouns.
Hello, this is Karina, she, her pronouns.
Kathy Pedersen, she, her.
Great.
And as Erica said, I'm Lisa Pellegrino, director at the Levy, and use she, her pronouns.
Okay. I'm a little worried that people on Zoom aren't able to speak. So can someone unmute themselves on Zoom and just show us that you're able to verbally participate so that we know that that technology is working? Jamie or Kamla or Lisa, any of you? Can you hear us now? We've been talking with you all on Zoom, and we're not getting any responses.
Oh, someone muted us again. That was me. Yeah, so we have to keep this computer unmuted. Yeah, okay, so can you, there we go.
Can you hear us now? Okay, thank you. We were just asking for anyone in the virtual participants to introduce yourselves and your pronouns before we get started.
Hi, I'm Jamie LeBaron. I use she and her pronouns.
I'm Lisa Woodorf. I use she and her pronouns.
Kamla, you're muted.
Okay, this time for real. I'm Kamala Hurst and I use she, her pronouns.
All right, thank you. I think we got everything working now. So can you just give me a thumbs up? You all can hear everything now on Zoom? Perfect, thank you. Okay, so next we're gonna move on to talking about the group agreements. It's been a little while and we have two new members who I really wanna welcome. So first we have Dean Salazar, who is joining us, brand new. And then over here we have Kathy Peterson, who is also brand new. And we're really excited to have them join the Community Council. So since it's been a little bit since we've met and we have these new members, we need to kind of read through our group agreements. And I'm going to ask for some volunteers to help with that as soon as we can move to that slide. Next slide. Joel?
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. Okay, so we have several. I would love it if some of the council members could help read those out loud. Like Amarachi, would you be willing to take the first one?
Sure. Make space, take space.
Cell phone on vibrate and put away unless you need to be available for an emergency.
Feel free to take care of your needs, get up as needed, etc.
Make facilitators aware of your access needs. We can support your full participation.
Listen to understand, not to respond.
If the facilitator says, I will call on X and then Y, and then we need to move on, please allow the facilitator to move on.
Impact over intent.
Use I statements.
Use yes and. A lot of things.
Open to diverse communication styles.
Expect non-closure.
Show up as authentic self.
Check your privilege at the door.
Wisdom is shared knowledge.
Make decisions based on your values.
Be respectful of disagreements. Acknowledge that we all have different perspectives.
Practice cultural awareness.
And the last one is the microphones at the table will be turned on during the meeting, so please refrain from side conversations at the table. Okay. That being said, now that we've reviewed it, if anyone does have access needs of which any of us as facilitators may not be aware, please make sure that you let us know so that we can accommodate your participation. And that includes those on Zoom. If you have anything that you need to send us in the chat, like you did a great job letting us know that you couldn't hear anything, which was helpful, please continue to do so. During this meeting, we are going to review the past meeting progress and the work that we have done over the course of the summer, prepping for community engagement. I'm really excited to talk to you all about that. And we're going to orient you to a new timeline and major steps for the upcoming funding process. And we're going to discuss and provide input on PCL's future grant applications. So I'm really excited about all of those bodies of work. Before we get into that, as you know, Rachel, who was our community engagement coordinator, left at the end of August. We expect to have a pool of applicants, by next Wednesday. Sorry, Alex, I said that wrong. This is Meg's in charge of that. And then we plan to hold interviews starting in mid-October. So some of you have already graciously agreed to serve on the interview panel, and we're really excited and grateful for that. And we hope to have our new community engagement coordinator on board in time for our November meeting. In the meantime, once she is well again, Meg will be continuing to support you, and I will be continuing to serve as backup. So hopefully, is that questions about that? Okay. So next, I'd like to take time to review some big picture parts of our work. So as we welcome in new members, and we haven't gathered together as a body since last spring, it's good to kind of bring all these big picture pieces back into mind. And also, 8 of you met with Levy staff in these optional meetings in August, and many of you suggested that we review these kind of big picture parts of the process. So Lisa is going to go over other pieces of the work in terms of the funding process, but I'm going to start to kind of remind you of our respective roles and then also talk to you about the community engagement process. So first, in our respective roles, you as community, so we have 3 bodies that are participating in kind of running the levy. We have the community council, the allocation committee, and the staff. The community council advises the allocation committee and the staff. So you all are giving us advice on how to run these different processes. The allocation committee decides the grant funding. So then once we have the applications put out, people have applied, and they've asked for different funding amounts for each of their programs, the allocation committee is deciding that grant funding. They also decide policies and processes, and the staff prepares policy and process issues for all of you and for the allocation committee. So we're really in that support role. And we also are in the implementation role. So we're implementing the grant making and the grant management policies and processes. We're supporting the grantees, you know, once we're providing that oversight in the implementation process. Okay, so we can go on. So yes, so finally, as staff, let's see. Yeah, that's it. We can go to the next slide, Joel. Okay. So now I want to shift to community engagement. So in May, you all recommended goals for community engagement process, the topics for the community engagement process, and the priority communities. And then those were approved by the allocation committee in June. Next slide. And the goals that are now accepted and are now part of the community engagement process are these ones. So the goals are to learn from diverse stakeholders about the most effective and needed services for children, especially children who are most affected by historical inequities and disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. To identify community solutions to improve outcomes for children and families, including culturally informed emerging grassroots strategies and pandemic recovery practices and the Children's Levy's program areas, and to build positive relationships with marginalized communities by incorporating the city's core values. As you might remember, when we first met, we kind of talked about the city's core values, which are things like collaboration, equity, anti-racism, transparency, fiscal responsibility. I think that's it. All right, you can go to the next slide. The other 2 goals are to promote community understanding and awareness of the Levy's work, including our funding processes, the services that we fund, and the demographics of the children and families that are served through Levy funding, and then to improve transparency in the community engagement process, and to ensure that community members who engage in the process continue to receive ongoing communication about PCL and how it uses its community feedback. That was one thing you all looked at the process last time and thought we could improve on kind of that feedback loop for the people who participated in the process. Okay, you can go to the next one. Oh, go back to topics. Back to topics, there you go. No worries. We're all we've had a lot of rearranging of how to do tonight, so just bear with us because everyone has a different role than we expected. Okay, so the topics that were approved, we did a lot of discussion and you all talked about the mental health topics of self-care, emotional regulation, culturally specific approaches to mental health, and training for providers. And then in mentoring, there were a couple. Mentoring was the only program area that had really specific recommendations. And those were culturally specific mentoring services and thinking about youth aging out of foster care. You also recommended other topics such as digital literacy, improving digital literacy for families, looking at violence prevention strategies, and asking about childcare affordability. So then next we were looking at the community engagement priority communities. So we want to reach as many communities as possible in the Portland area, but we specifically wanted to have certain communities really engaged so we could get some information about them as we're shaping our application process. And those communities that you identified were very low income families, single heads of household and single parents, LGBTQ2SIA+ youth, and then youth and families who have the following kind of lived experiences. So Black and African American families, African immigrant families, Southeast Asian, Pacific Islander, Latinx, Latine, Latino, Native American and Alaskan Native, Ukrainian, Russian, Middle Eastern immigrant or refugees, and youth and families who have experienced trauma and violence, who have disabilities, who have experienced housing instability, families living in multi-generational homes, youth aging out of foster care, and teen parents. Let's see. Yes. So once PCL's allocation committee approved those recommendations in June, we got to work hiring a community engagement consultant team. We looked to a statewide database of businesses who are certified by the Office of Business and Inclusion, who specialize in community engagement in the Portland area. And these are businesses that are women-owned, minority-owned, veteran-owned, and or emerging small businesses. Then we interviewed 3 groups we thought would be a good fit. 2 of them submitted proposals for the project, and then we selected Camille Trummer and her team. They will be doing for us all of the following activities, which is a lot. We've been working together to start to get the proposed community engagement plan together. They'll be doing survey transcreation. So that means translation, but in a very collaborative process. So they'll be working with a group called Verbio, who does the translation with native speakers, and it's kind of like a collaborative process of these are the questions that we have, but how do we get things translated not so that it's just verbatim, but that it's for meaning. So like, for example, I speak Swahili, and in the Swahili dictionary, there would be pages and pages of definitions for certain English words. So sometimes it takes more to get to that meaning. So they're really going to be working with Verbio on that, and they will be transcreating the surveys into 6 languages. But that's not all the languages we're going to get to. That's just the ones that will have the written transcreation, and I'll talk about the verbal interpretation in a minute. They will also be developing an online version of the survey, so some people will be able to directly respond online. There'll be different links for different languages. They'll also be doing outreach for their community engagement activities. Camille's team will be working to complete 250 to 300 surveys. They will be doing 6 to 8 focus groups. I think that we've kind of actually settled at 8. They will be doing 8 to 10 stakeholder interviews. The stakeholder interviews are meant to kind of fill in gaps in our understanding. So there are groups that have been either underrepresented in our, there are groups that we don't know how well we're reaching. And so the stakeholders will help us to get to some of those groups to see, okay, what are the barriers to reaching these groups? What are things that we need to know? They will also be doing data analysis from the survey and the focus groups and the interviews. So they will take all of this data that's quantitative and qualitative, and they will be putting it in a report, and they will come to you and report out on all of the results with all of the findings. Now, can you go to the next slide? The Camille's team will also be kind of a supplement. So we're having a two-part approach to this community engagement. We will also be working with the community engagement liaisons, the cells. The cells will be doing outreach to culturally specific communities in 17 languages. The city holds an existing contract with the company that oversees the cells program, PKS International, and they work to increase public engagement with these marginalized communities. The cells are leaders in their culturally specific communities, and they specialize in community outreach and engagement activities. They will be working to complete more than 230 surveys. We've increased that. It was originally 230. I think it's closer to 300. Yeah, it's 300 now. And the way they're going to be doing that, they will be taking, so for those 6 languages that we have written, those languages work well with the written word in their language. There are some cultural communities that may not have ever learned to read in their home language, read and write in that language. And the cells will be working with them to verbally interpret those surveys and to complete the surveys in like either one-on-one settings or group settings. They may be working in like church together doing it, but they will be doing outreach and working in their communities so that we can cover 17 languages in total. Yes, was someone question? I was about to, but I heard it. Okay. So during this month, we're trying to complete this plan. We're finalizing the contracts with both Camille's team and the cells right now. We had a launch meeting, and we will be coming back to you in November with the findings of what's set. But I want to stop here now because I just covered a lot and ask for questions.
My first question is, you said that there'll be like, it'll be translated, written in 6 languages, right?
Yes.
What are those 6 languages?
That is a very good question, and I should have written them down. I think Lisa can help me with that.
I think I can remember. I hope I get it
Yeah,
right.
and
I think the 6 written languages were going to be Vietnamese and Spanish and Russian and Ukrainian and Nepali.
Chukis, maybe?
I think Chukis was one of the verbal ones.
Yeah, that's one of the verbal ones. Let me see if I can come up with that last one from my memory. I'm not pulling it out right now.
I can pull it up on the break.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you give me a sec, I can get on the computer.
So were those based on like this, like the most commonly like spoken languages that are easy to like have translated, like written?
Yes, and so in working with the cells, so for example, the Vietnamese one, they do a lot, each community kind of spreads the word and does the survey completion in a different way. So some will give out the written surveys to folks, some will be doing this online, and some are doing it kind of verbally. And how those languages were chosen was really based on our communication with the person who coordinates the cells program. It wasn't like we chose, oh, this community gets, like we would have paid for all 17 languages to be transcreated, but if that was what was wanted, but that wasn't what we were told made most sense for all communities.
May I speak?
Yes.
Yes. So what are the 17 languages? I know you're struggling with 6 languages, but what about the other?
So we have, part of the reason why we're struggling is because they kept changing a little bit, and we're like on about the 10th version of the task order, and some changes were just made. Let's see how many of them I can. I know we only have, we're also short on computers here.
I'm surprised that you guys didn't have ancient Greek in there at some point. I'm just kidding.
So, yes, and also she just grouped together, oh, I just realized I went off mic. I'm sorry about that. She also grouped together certain communities. So I know, let's go Pacific Islander, we had Chuukese, Marshallese, Samoan, Tongan. I think those were the 4. Then Slavic, we have Russian, Ukrainian. African, we had Swahili, Somali, Tigrinya, Amharic. That's 10. Other regions, let's see. Yes, there's,
Myanmar refugee.
yes, Rohingya,
Yeah, Rohingya.
Karen, Burmese, Zomi.
You're doing great here.
Nepali.
You kind of killed it.
Yes.
There's also Cambodian and
Cambodian, Spanish, yes.
that we don't.
Yes.
Cambodian and Khmer. No. Laotian.
Mon.
Kradai? Oh, wait, no, that's a language group. Never mind.
Yes. We can send out the full thing, yes.
Yeah,
thank
that'd
you.
be nice.
Okay. I can even do that on the break. So,
Did you say,
More
Erica,
questions?
then those surveys are going to be conducted by November, by our next meeting? No. Okay. 'cause that seemed like
okay.
a lot.
We are going to, we will not be finished with a full community engagement process by November, especially because we've had a little bit of delay in the contracting process. Lisa sighs. But we are very close. We're about tied up with both contracts. We will have started. Pin Ka, who is the coordinator of the community engagement liaisons, thinks that she can get all of their surveys done in about 6 weeks. But then Camille's team still needs to also do their surveys, as well as 8 focus groups and 10 interviews. And so we're hoping to finish up the whole community engagement process by the end of December or the first part of January, depending on kind of when we get started. Then when the findings are done we haven't set your meetings next year yet, but a spring meeting, when you're meeting in the spring, Camille's team will come back to you and they will be presenting all of the findings from the focus groups, the interviews, and the surveys. And yes, and so you will be able to have all of that, and you will be using that information to make some adjustments. Like, we're already going to start tonight working on the application process. That's the next thing Lisa's going to be working on with you. But at that time, after, we'll kind of be moving forward in that, and if we come back and we say, okay, now we're going to look at all of the findings with Camille's team of the community engagement. If there's things that we need to change or adjust or add in, that's when we will be doing that work.
The idea was by November you'll have a plan. You'll be able to see what the community engagement plan is, like how it's all going to time out.
Thank you.
I have one last question. I'm sorry.
Go for it, Emma, aren't you?
Asking so many, but what will be the makeup of the stakeholders? You mentioned stakeholders. Like, what's the general makeup of the stakeholders?
Well, I am interested, if you all have feedback in that, you can. One thing that I specifically talked with Camille's team about at the launch meeting was we talked about kind of filling in those gaps. So we're going to be doing the focus groups based on kind of lived experiences. We'll be doing one in Spanish, and the others will be in English. And we want to make sure that we're getting those lived experience groups. So, you know, the LGBTQ youth, people who have experience with foster care as either parents or all of those kinds of like lived experience groups. But there may be areas as we're making this plan and implementing where there are gaps in knowledge. And so for example, one thing I mentioned was we don't have any specific programs that are particular to LGBTQ youth, like just that group. But that is because no one has applied, not because people have applied and we haven't funded it. And so that's an area where it's like, okay, well, it might be good to talk to key stakeholders to find out why people are not applying so that we can think about what needs to be adjusted for that. There may be other areas that come up where we're like, where as she's looking at the findings from the focus groups and from the surveys, there's like, oh, here are some areas where we need more information and we want to follow up with those stakeholders. So those stakeholders will probably be done towards the end to kind of fill in missing pieces. But if there are specific pieces that the council is interested in making sure that we, really want to talk to that person individually or that group, then that would be good information for us to know. Are there any, do any of the virtual participants have any questions? I want to check in with you. No. Kamla, nothing? You always have questions.
I have some questions later, but thank you.
Okay, good.
So sorry, I just thought of one last question, Erica. Within this community engagement process, is there a plan to engage current grantees around feedback?
That's a good question. When we do the survey, there's the main survey I've been talking about is like the community survey, and that's specifically not grantees. Same with focus groups, but we will be having a provider survey, and that's like people who are, providing services and stuff, and that could be that opportunity. We want to be very careful with things like the focus groups and with the interviews to avoid doing that because there's no way to equally engage all grantees. We have 50 grantees. They can't all be at focus groups. So in order to be equitable, we're trying to really kind of engage members of the community who represent all those demographics that we mentioned earlier who are not directly connected to our grantees. All right, well, we can circle back to this, but I think I'm going to pass it on to Lisa, who's going to start talking to you about the funding process and the application process so we can get to that piece of the work today.
Okay, thanks, Erica. Joel, do you want to go ahead and go to the first slide?
You did.
No, I'm sorry, the next slide.
Okay.
The substantive slide.
Yeah.
And you all who are in person have this same diagram, I think, in your little papers there, if that's easier to look at, because I know it's kind of a little bit small when you try to see it. So you just heard from Erica a recap on what you've done so far, and you might recall that, well, as you said too, that you reviewed kind of what the work was going to look like at the first council meeting, kind of what our next 3 years would look like. So this is kind of a visual representation of what the work is over the next couple years, and for people who orient more that way. And that arrow, that big arrow on the side there, is showing where we are now. So behind the arrow is the work you've done thus far, and in front of the arrow is kind of what's coming up. So while community engagement is underway, we're going to be spending the next 9 to 12 months developing the funding process. And as we approach the fall of '24, we're going to be implementing that funding process. So that's the time period that the funding will be active. It takes about 9 months to do that. So we want to be able to allow new grants to start on July 1st of 2025. And the reason for that date is because that's when all of the current grants expire. So we're aiming to get through our funding process and have the decisions made and be ready to move forward before those expire. And the reason that we do that is there are definitely grantees that get continuing funding. And we tried to create no gaps in that funding for people who do get continuing funding so that staff continue on in positions and clients are not having an interruption in service. So that's kind of why that date is it is a date that we have to pay attention to and finish up by. Okay, Jill, you can go to the next slide. So the funding process, this kind of outlines what is the funding process, what's included in the funding process. And it's basically three main parts. We have an application phase or process, and a review process, so when the applications have been turned in and they're then being scored. And then we have the funding recommendations process. So the focus of today's meeting is going to be the application process, and that includes the funding application, which we call a request for investment, or an RFI for short. So it's not a term that a lot of people are familiar with, but if you hear us say RFI, that's what we're talking about. And the RFI includes the funding priorities. So as Erica was talking about before with community engagement, kind of the point and purpose of community engagement is to hear what the community's priorities are, and the idea is to then translate that into the funding application. So that's a piece of work that's going to go into the application. The review process involves all the folks who are going to score the applications based on the criteria that we all set up. Part of the work that we're going to do today is going to help inform what those criteria might look like. So we'll be starting that on the brainstorming shortly. During the review phase, the staff is also doing some work. We're summarizing the applications to put them into a shorter format so people can digest them. And we are analyzing some of the data in the applications by the program areas. So we're looking at a little bit higher view of all the information from the applicants from a program area. And then last, there's funding recommendations. So the staff creates a set of funding recommendations based on the scores and based on some of the analysis that we'll do on the program area, what the applications are for in a particular funding area. And then with the council now involved in our work, we want the council to have input on those recommendations. So we'll be working with you in future meetings at the council to try to design how we do that. The goal is, since it's a new part of our process, we want to figure out how to make it feasible and meaningful for you all to weigh in on the staff recommendations. So that's upcoming work and kind of the three main phases that we're going to do it in. Okay, Joel, you can move on to the next slide. Okay, so this just kind of runs through the basic timeline of what's going to happen when. And this is tentative, so these dates are general. They could shift, but we're hoping that it will go something like this. So for the remainder of this year, sort of September from now until through December, we're going to be working in this group on drafting the application and the scoring criteria, and today specifically brainstorming on the application. And then we'll begin talking about the review process and how that gets designed, so figuring out what the choices are for design there. We imagine that we'll be iterating drafts of the application and the scoring criteria with you, so you'll see as we take input and then draft and come back to you and you look at the next iteration in this time period. In January through March of '24, we imagine getting to the point of finalizing the application and the scoring criteria template, so we're going to keep on iterating those drafts in that time period and coming to a decision on the final draft. And then once we have a final draft, we will want to put that out for broader public input. And then, so Alex, you asked about grantees having input. That would definitely go to them. They're part of the general community that we would be putting out our draft template and scoring criteria to hear back. And then trying to take into account that feedback, keeping in mind feedback sometimes is contradictory, so it may require weighing which things you value most and making decisions, but that we would want to then iterate that next draft, that would be the final draft, is kind of taking that input and putting that in a final draft. Before we then, in the spring, take it to the allocation committee. So we would take that finalized application, scoring criteria, and review process proposal all to the allocation committee for their review and feedback. And then the idea, I think, would be that the community engagement process is going to be finishing around the same time. So you would, the application questions and all of that sort of stuff is the stuff that we can work on in terms of design. The community engagement piece is going to be what should we fund and how should we be funding it, what sorts of things, what communities, all that stuff. So when we hear back from that, you're going to work with those recommendations and figure out how does that go into the application as well. So that's kind of the final piece of work in the spring. For the summer and into the fall, we'll be thinking about developing and working with you to develop and finalize how you're going to provide input on staff recommendations. So what kind of process we can use for that and how much time and that sort of thing. So that's a basic run through of our tentative timeline, which we hope very much we can stick to if all goes well. Okay, Joel, you want to, oh, you did, thank you. Right ahead of me. So for more visual, that's a lot of words and a lot of talking. This is kind of a distillation of what I just said. So here's the time period, and those are the three elements of the process and kind of over when that's going to occur. Okay, Joel, you can take it to the next slide. Okay, so now that you're oriented to where we're going, I'll give you just a quick brief summary of some of the work that the staff did over the summer around the funding process design. The first thing we did was sort of identify and discuss our values and to align them with the city values that Erica just went over at the beginning here. And so the values are up there on the slide of equity, that the process be community-driven, that it be feasible for all of us to do, transparent, accessible, and inclusive. We also reflected on the past experiences, so we get feedback when we do funding rounds, and we had about 50 reviewers give feedback last time and about 40 applicants. So we kind of remembered that because the last funding process was 2019 and 20, so that was a while ago. So it just went back to hear it, and also pre-pandemic, so in a different world. But we went back to make sure we were paying attention to that. And then we did a series of meetings where we were coming together to weigh different design options for the process against our values to see how well they would stack up against the values that we identified. And then began to identify the key topics that we wanted to make sure to get your input on, and that is the application, the review, and the recommendation. So that's kind of how we landed on those three areas for you all to work with us on. Okay, Joel, you can move on. So this is the same slide again. You're going to see this diagram a lot. You're going to probably get tired of looking at it. This is just meant to show you this is where we're focusing the brainstorming you're going to do tonight. It's all on the application side. So that's sort of topic one. And then Joel, final slide. As we were going through our meetings and kind of identifying what we thought was a key area for improvement for us was around simplifying our application. So that's, as you head into this discussion, it's, those are the things that we were thinking most about. It was the feedback that we heard most from reviewers, not surprisingly, because they had to read a lot of those applications. Yes, I imagine Alex remembers that. And then the staff and the council both value accessible and inclusive and community-driven and feasible processes, so simplification all works toward that too. And then just, we don't want to give you our last application because we would like you to come into this with as clear a brain and as open a mind as you can as you start to come back and do more of a brainstorming look. But our last application was a pretty heavy lift for people. It was probably more than 20 pages when people submitted it. It was pretty technical. It was a pretty heavy workload for applicants and for reviewers. So we're trying to figure out how we could approach it differently, and that's where you all come in. So I'll stop there and just happy to take any questions for clarification before Erica. I guess we take maybe a break for a minute.
We take a break, and then when we
give the
come back, we're going to go into small groups and do some application work. But first, questions.
Yeah, so does anyone have questions just on process stuff? Go right ahead.
I was
Yes.
just curious.
You can go first.
Sorry. How long are the funded projects? How many years?
So all of our grants are multi-years. They're like 3 to 5. So for example, most of our grantees have finished up 3 years, and then they're getting an extension that gets them through this period while we're opening up and getting ready for the next round.
Thanks.
Each levy is about 5 years, and typically we leave the eligibility for about 5 years with that renewal option after 3.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, so we said small group discussions on 2 key issues. Is that going to be like these tables or?
We will give you instructions when we get back, but we'll have, let's see, how many people do we? We have 7 in person. So we'll have 2 in-person groups, and we'll have 2, how many of you do we have online? We'll have 1, I think, virtual group.
I have a question about, so Lisa, you mentioned we are not going to look at the application from before so we can start fresh, right? But are we looking at any of the other materials in terms of the review process and like feedback that you got from before? Will we be looking at any of that? Not necessarily tonight, but as part of the process?
Definitely. Where the idea would be to, I think, look at the review process in the next meeting. So this is kind of focused on application and the review. And it's going to be iterative. You're going to be looking at both of these things as we go through it. And yes, definitely we can give you access to the feedback that we got. We did little reports on kind of adding up all that data. I'll be happy to give those to you.
We wanted to have more time to specifically focus on the review process, and we needed to kind of get started with all of this first. Any other questions? Kamla.
Hi.
Hold on. It sounds like there's 2 people online. I saw Kamla first, and I'm not sure who the second person was. I just heard them. but,
It's me, Lisa.
okay, so Kamla and then Lisa.
I just wanted to thank you for that information. It's really clear. And I also wanted to just note the appreciation that you're going to go to past applicants for feedback throughout this process, which I think is really great. So I just wanted to note that.
Thank you. Lisa?
How many of the current grantees would be eligible or whatever for new grants in the new grant period?
Well, and in some ways, you as council will be giving us feedback on criteria and different things, and that will determine the answer to that question, the criteria that the council and the allocation committee approve.
And also,
I
Lisa,
don't think my question was very clear, maybe, but is there any limit to how many times an organization can get?
There's no set term limits
Granted.
or anything like that.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay. Then let's see, what time is it? Let's take a 10-minute break. So that puts us back at 7:06, looks like. And then I will also, and we'll put up a slide with the languages. So when you come back, so you can look at that, and then I'll give you directions to get into the small groups. Sound good?
bathrooms are through the door. If anybody needs. So. Okay. Through that door. Yeah, exactly. I went all the way around the wrong way, that's why I know that.
Oh, Kamala Hurst. I was
Yeah.
like, who was
has to be on in order to know it's charging. All right. Joel save the day?
Thank you for being patient with us. Once again, we had technical difficulties, but we are back.
Look at this list. There's your languages.
Yes, for those of you who were, yes, for those of you who were wanting, those are the languages that we will be covering in our community engagement process.
You guys actually named them all.
I did, except for Sudanese. I think I got them all. And so, yeah, so you have all of that, and we can send out that list separately.
Where's the invite? I usually go to the calendar.
It's right there.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so we are going to shift here, and Joel, are you able to move back to the, thank you. Perfect. So we're moving along. Hold on one second. You got to get to PCC guests down here.
Where? I didn't log in. You logged in.
Okay. And then
We'll get
it
there.
should, okay.
Okay.
In just a second, I am going to put you into small groups, but while Lisa is working out a couple of our technical issues, I'm going to go ahead and explain to you the next part. So let me move here. So we are going to start with kind of this brainstorming process. We're going to move into small groups in just a second, and I will assign each group either question A or question B. So I think in the virtual group, since we only are going to have one virtual group, we're going to ask you to answer question B, and we will be putting that in the chat. And that's what important information is needed about the program services an applicant wants funded in order to decide whether to fund it. So we're going to want you to brainstorm of those. And in this group, in the in-person group, we will have two groups. One will have question A and one will have question B. And that will get us started kind of as Lisa was talking about, to really start brainstorming and thinking about how we can create an application that gets us all the information that we want, but where we're simplifying the application. When you're in those small groups, can you go to the next slide, Joel? We're going to ask that you choose roles. So you have one person who is a timekeeper and a facilitator, kind of really keeping everyone on task, and one person to report out. When you report out, we will be recording your answers on the screen so that we can hear from each group. Okay, and yes, and I'll take notes on that. So let's see where we are in time right now. Okay. So I will go ahead and split people up. Let's see, let's have just this side of the table be one group, and you will be answering the first question. We'll put that back up on a slide in a second, but you'll be answering question A. This side of the table will be answering question B. And we already gave that to the virtual participants. You can spread out at either table, and let's give you about 15 minutes in your small groups. Lisa, you need me to do the breakout?
Yep.
Send them to breakout room? Okay.
voted us out of our group early.
Okay. We're going to rejoin the group. Thank you, everyone. It looks like people are having good chats. I didn't get any chat messages from the breakout room, so hopefully you guys were fine on your own. I'm going to start with the virtual group, actually, and give you a chance to report out first. Just what you, tell us what your topic was, and then tell us the key points from your discussion. Whoever wants to report out from the online group.
Me. So we talked about what info we would want about the project organization in order to be funded. The first category we talked about is just getting a broad sense of their fiscal responsibility, and that would look like some really basic questions of like a strong project budget, an organizational budget just to capture the scale, and really keeping it simple. And Kamala pointed out that like when she's doing grants, sorry, my family's in the background, that when they are having grant support, like the budget is that's like the most time consuming, most complicated part. So that was the first one. The second one was to demonstrate how the program is culturally specific or responsive or relevant. And there could be more conversations on maybe like a hierarchy of points, or how we would want to prioritize groups that are doing that work for those communities. And the last one that we didn't quite finish on was around evidence of like creating equitable outcomes. So what does success look like? And that can be demonstrated through the narrative, like the need for the project in general, and then also, you know, in quantitative terms too, of we're going to provide XYZ to, you know, this many kids or this many families. So just to get a sense of qualitative and quantitative reasoning behind the project. Anyone else? Kamala or Lisa, if you have more you want to add.
I just wanted to say that we also talked about focusing on making the application user-friendly and also scorer-friendly. So using checklists in terms of the budget, maybe using budgets that we are, like, for example, their fiscal budget from the previous year or that kind of thing, rather than asking them to do specific budget work specifically for the grant. Also, that some of the small grantees or new grantees might need technical assistance in preparing a budget, and that probably should be something that is offered.
Sorry, is that all from that group?
That's all we got to. It went by really quick.
I can tell it did. Thank you so much. So the second group, maybe the group that had Kathy in it, would you like to go next and start by telling me if you had anything that you discussed in your group that's already on here? And then if not, we'll continue to add on. Okay. Oh, we'll start with that. Okay, go ahead. Did you have anything that was already on here?
We had a few things that were already on there, but we have a few other things as well.
Okay, first, can you tell me which things they have that you also have?
The budget piece was one that we talked quite a bit about.
Okay.
And then I think everything else we kind of touched on, but we kind of drilled down in a different set of areas. So
Okay, great.
We kind of started thinking about like understanding who you're going to serve, how you're going to serve them, what you're going to do, the why, like why are you doing this particular set of programs and services, like who told you that, and then what's the impact of those services, or what do you expect the impact to be? So when we talked about who, really understanding the target population and some of the experience and capacity that the organization has in serving that target population. And in that same kind of vein, like, is this an expansion of your current work? Is this new work? Is this continuing your work that's already in progress? In the hows and the whats, like what are the key aspects of your program? Like if you're using a curriculum, or if you're, doing a set of services with folks, what's your staffing plans and your caseloads? And how does that connect to your budget? In the whys and the impact, we talked a lot about really understanding how you came to know that the need was there in the community, what your plan has been around outreaching to that community, and then in evaluating your services in collaboration with the community. So once your services have started, how do you plan to continue to engage with the community you serve to understand whether or not your services are having the impact you think that they're going to have? And
Can I clarify that last point? So it sounds a little bit like what we currently have in our grant is like client voice. Are you saying like hearing back from your clients about the kind of impact you've had in the program, or kind of the broader community?
I think yes, and I think yes, client voice, and then also like what is your evaluation plan to continue to reach out both to folks that you're serving and then to also people in your community around your service delivery model.
Okay. Great.
I'm not sure I got all of that.
We do have a recording, so we can go back.
I guess that's true. So
I'm a fast talker, sorry.
I was
Lisa.
going to say, you were starting to, there were a lot of questions there. I'm not sure I got them all. Alex, I don't know if you can see these up here, but did I miss anything key here that you want me to get down? I can look at the recording, but I kind of start here, and then I went down to here.
Yeah, I think around like it's not necessarily like what curriculum are you using, but just like what is your overall like program plan? Like what does your program look like? And I think just the other key pieces that we talked about were like kind of leaving some space in the application for folks to speak more qualitatively and narratively about their work, and maybe backing off a bit on some of the like more like intensely technical pieces of the application, or like finding other ways to get that information that aren't just like quite so technical or like such a heavy lift for folks. And then we had also mentioned in our group the interview option that the small grants had, which I know would be a very heavy lift for the large grants, but like allowing some space for just, again, some more of that like narrative and qualitative work in the application.
Okay, so just to clarify that for other council members that may not be familiar with what Alex just mentioned, when we had the small grants process, it was a two-step process. The first step was just a written application that was very simple. And in the second step, people had, not in person because we were in 2020, so Zoom interviews with a couple of reviewers for each of their applications. So that's the process that Alex is referring to. Great. Okay, so nothing else to add with that group? That was a lot.
That was a
Yes. Okay, and last group. And if you could tell us your question again, and then also if there's anything that was already said that gels with what your group discussed, then let us know that, and otherwise continue on.
Okay, that was a lot. Thank you, Alex. So we tackled question A, what are the most important qualities of an organization that should receive PCL grants and why? And I think we started slipping into question B quite a bit. So some of our
That's fine.
responses echo what the other group had already said, because we started kind of getting into sort of the technical aspects too. But essentially, we were trying to really focus. We were trying to figure out what was meant by quality. This, the qualities of the organization. So things we focused on were mission statement, which might already be up there. And is their mission statement seem actionable? Is the staff representative of that mission and the community they are serving, which definitely sounds like some of the things that Alex was just referring to. So are their values aligned with both PCL values and with the community they are serving, and how do we know that? So I guess that would be the community voice piece that was referenced. And are they knowledgeable about it, and based off what data? How do we know that this is that these qualities are ones that are representative and based off what information? In terms of let's see, I think that's it. The why aspect of is to indicate their success. The success, will there be data to back up the work? Does the community agree? Do we see it as actionable is it seen as actionable in the community? And is there a evaluation or self-evaluation process? And then we kind of, I think, started slipping into some of the services. I'm not sure, so I think they're in here, but the number of people served, the impact, seed money, or is this money, seed money to continue the work? How sustainable is the work? And yeah, back to the evaluation process. So I think that's what we got.
That's great. So I'm going to let Lisa finish transcribing that last point.
That kind of goes, but because I can't keep everything on the screen. at the same
Yeah, it's
time,
okay.
I'll mark that. I can see that came up in many responses, so we can kind of group that together, but I'm going to have to go up to the top to put the asterisks in there.
So we're going to kind of look at all of this, and then I want to facilitate a little discussion. So could you scroll up to the top a little bit?
Let me make it a little smaller, maybe?
Yeah,
I
sure.
don't know if that would work better, but
I know we're not going to be able to see everything all at once, but
see if I can do it.
there you go.
Dare you not capture my exhaustive list of.
I was going to say that was a lot of things.
It was.
All right, well, all right.
It's okay. Just scroll up a little bit.
Yep, there we go.
There we go.
It says info that people want from programs.
So looking at this, just want to open up to the group and see kind of what catches your attention and where do we think we have the most agreement so far. Especially let's start thinking about like where we have the most agreement about like organizational qualities of what we want to see in an organization.
Organization, that's down. Do you want me to go down?
Let's go down first then.
Because this is the info about the organization. All right, let me see if I can make it a little smaller so I could actually get it in one place. This is smaller. Okay, hang on, just a second.
Perhaps I'll jump in while we're figuring that out.
Thanks.
And I'm going to cheat a little bit because fiscal responsibility was on the top list, but I do think that kind of like hops between both questions, including qualities of an organization. One thing that came up very briefly in our conversation was like, responsibility of the use of the funds. And of course, we want to avoid any form of fraudulent like use of funds. And something that I really care about is not forcing organizations to have low overhead. Because that forces them to, not have the resources internally to develop their people, to, support the staff in doing their best work and creates a scarcity mindset. And so when we evaluate for fiscal responsibility, I would just push for us to think about what like balanced budgets and what like is a balanced way of approaching fiscal responsibility, not just having the lowest overhead possible.
Yeah, thank you. For the rest of you, what else catches your attention from this list of like organizational qualities?
We also briefly discussed the sort of types of groups that we want to prioritize. If you two remember correctly, I mean you three, sorry, and that included, of course, that included communities of immigrants, of course, communities of color, and then of course single parents as well.
Thank you, Deanne.
I think what stood out to me is do they have the data to back up their work? Is there evaluation or self-evaluation process? Some of the questions that I have when I read that was, what about organizations in which maybe they're really grassroots, so they don't have the resources to have that data back up? Or even there are many communities, even here in Portland, in which there's not a lot of like statistics or studies done in those communities, maybe because they're often under-resourced, underlooked, or maybe the community number are so small so that data scientists often don't prioritize it, or just organizations that do fund research don't prioritize those communities. So I feel like that have data back it up, that could be hard. So my suggestion is like, in that case, could it be more like can it be more like data in terms of like from community, their feedback, or more narrative based? That's just when I think of data, I just think as someone who's worked in communities where it's hard to find that data, especially when you're a small organization. To find data is often like, it takes a lot of like money and resources. So that's just what I thought when I was thinking of that point.
Thank you, Amarachi. Karina, I see you. I just want to say something real fast before you speak. I just wanted to clarify, because I don't think that has been clear in our presentations yet. So the application process that we are starting with right now is for the large grants. We will do more work separately for the small grants. The small grants have currently been extended to a later date so that we have time to run that process separately. So a lot of the small grantees are the more grassroots organizations. The way that it's currently structured is those are organizations that, when they applied, had budgets of $1 million or less. That threshold could change through the work of this council. But just so you know, like the organizations that we're talking about for this process are larger than that. Go ahead, Karina.
Oh, I just wanted to add on to what Amarachi was saying, and the part of our why was, are we able to like see it actionably in the community? Simply to your point, exactly, is a lot of underrepresented communities and communities of people of color don't often trust data when it is collected due to research bias and systemic racism within data and data collecting. So something that we talked about as a group was, if the quantitative is there, that's awesome, but we really want to see, like, is that mission statement, are there values, is it actionable, is it out there, and does the community kind of agree with what this organization and their qualities? The example I used with us was, if we're hiring people, not that we're hiring people, it's just for pure example, is you can have a resume, right? And that resume could fulfill all of question B, but then you question A them, you see them, and you meet them, and you see their qualities, and you find out, oh, just because you have the data doesn't necessarily mean your qualities are gonna align. So I fully want to, let Amarachi know, like, yeah, we definitely want to always understand that problem comes with data sometimes.
Alex, do you have anything to add about that? You look like you're about to say anything, and then we'll move on to the next part.
Stop reading my face, Eric.
Yes, go ahead, Stephen.
I'll just add one thing really quickly on the topic of evaluation and data collection, which goes away from like formal evaluation and more so speaks to their ongoing process of learning, which we talked a little bit about. I think an important quality of an organization is one that constantly seeks feedback and shows that they can grow from it, especially given these grants are long-term grants we were talking about. Like, you know, the application could be a hypothesis for what they think will happen, and they can learn pretty quickly that it's not working. So how are they going to adapt and ensure that they're improving their model rather than waiting until year 3 to say, oh, it didn't work, you know?
Thank you. That's a great point. Okay, so.
A question too.
Yes, go ahead.
I didn't hear anybody, or maybe I missed it, around whether we would want to prioritize new projects versus ones like sometimes in grants, it's like, what's your plan to make this self-sustaining? And you're like, there isn't one. It's just going to have to be grant funded. There really isn't a way to fund it. So sometimes you can like lose funding because you haven't reinvented your program, which might work very well, other than it doesn't generate enough income to make it self-sustaining. I'd be curious what other people think about whether they would want to continue or refund the same projects time over time if they're showing all the things and meeting all the criteria, but we haven't. But really, maybe there's just not a long-term plan to ever be able to fund it.
Thoughts from the group?
I just have a question because now I'm a little confused. So these grants are for larger organizations, right? But a larger organization can have a new program or new service they're providing, or maybe it's like they haven't really developed it that much, and that's why they're seeking this, right? Then is there funding? Is it possible for an organization, although large, if the program is just like up and coming, is it possible for would they be I don't know, I don't want to say eligible, like a competitive, like would they be considered? That's just a question I have.
So to clarify, if you're applying for Levy funds, you currently have to be a nonprofit. And I need to clarify that, like in small grants, we've had people that had fiscal sponsors, but they were already Oregon nonprofits. They just did not yet have their 501c3, and then they had their fiscal sponsor at that time. So you have to be a nonprofit. And and then if you are getting funds, if your annual budget is above a certain amount, a certain threshold, which currently is the 1 million threshold, then that informs whether you're applying for large grants or small grants. So if you're below that, you're applying for small grants. If you're, yeah.
That was actually not the case last time because we set a minimum grant level for the large grants last time that was $60,000. And so, you know, an organization could have as little as $270,000 in revenue and still apply for a grant at that level. So we didn't separate the two last time because we didn't have a small grants fund when we ran the large grants fund last time because it was new. So this time we'll have to clarify that.
And the criteria was that it couldn't be above a certain percentage of your overall, like this grant could not be above a certain percentage of your overall budget.
Yes.
Your operating budget.
It can't be above 30%.
My question is not whether the organization is self-sustaining, like I would assume that it is. It's whether the project itself could become self-sustaining. Whether we would continue, maybe there is a program that won't really ever be able to be funded by that organization, but it's still a program that's important. Would we want to have that be a neutral factor or a negative factor to come, you know, they apply for this levy or a small grant or large grant, whatever, and they come back and apply again the next time that there's a levy. That's my question. Does that make sense?
Wouldn't you, when that happens, wouldn't you, I don't know if this is what you do they have a final progress report at the end of their grant funding period where they show number served, how successful and all that? So would that be used for the next round? Or?
We ask those questions much more often than at the end of the process, at the end of the project. So yes, that information is, they would be able to talk about that information if they were reapplying. And I guess just to answer Jamie, at least in the past, there's been no prejudice against an organization for reapplying for money. We don't ask, and we never have asked, whether you could sustain the program some other way. We don't ask that question and never have.
Oh, okay.
We could, but I'm not hearing any particular, nobody really commented whether they want us to ask that question.
So we are coming up on time, and I want to just make sure we're looking at this. And are there any other things that anyone has burning thoughts of wanting to bring out about either the programs or the organizations? You want to make sure we could kind of get into the notes for tonight, or are there any areas of clarification? And then we'll move to start wrapping things up.
There's one, I don't know if we touched on this or not, but so if a grantee or if an applicant is applying to work with a community that has never been served, would they get extra, would we want to weigh that more? And I don't know that we've touched on that, but that's a question I'd like to put out.
It's a good question. Group? Council?
Assuming, of course, they have the other qualities in
Like,
place.
The question, I think, is do we want to weigh or give extra points for communities that have not been historically served by the levy?
My gut instinct is yes. I mean, it feels like it that would be more equitable, right? If funds have gone to certain communities or there have been funded efforts and this community or need has not been met. And so thinking about like ways of distributing the funds equitably would align with that, I think.
Yes, similar to what Stephen said, though I also think we should focus on specifically the level of the needs of the community itself, the new community that we might be taking on, just so we can make sure that we have the most balanced results spread across the board. That's just my take on it.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to take all of this information, we're going to wrap it up, I'll put it in notes for you, and we have 2 more meetings scheduled where we're going to continue to work on the application process. Today was just a beginning, so I realize that we're not quite achieving closure yet, but that's because we're not done. So it's okay. You can, if you have more thoughts, you can send those to us as we go. So I just want to kind of wrap up and wanted to do kind of a quick what worked well and what could be improved about this meeting moving forward. And again, we realized there were a few, we didn't have quite as many bells as whistles as we typically do because we ended up missing 3 members of our staff. So there's probably a couple extra could improve, but thank you for bearing with us through tonight.
Thank you very much for my.
Yes. So Lisa will take notes on this, but if anybody has things that worked well, we can start there and you can just popcorn. And if not, you can jump to the improves.
I really appreciated the opportunity to work in small groups and like dive into a question. I would though have liked more time in small groups.
Okay.
And the opportunity to like spend some more time on those questions.
Great.
This is Kamala. I want to piggyback on that and just say I appreciate getting the questions in advance so that we have an opportunity to come prepared.
Thank you.
I appreciated this timeline. I think I have advocated for this, but it really helps to like position ourselves in like the process and understand what happened and what's ahead. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and anything that you would like us to improve for next time?
This is Lisa. I would like it. I think if we could start on time. I know you guys had a lot going on tonight, but I think that really to me the most valuable part of the meeting is the group discussions and then the recap afterwards. And I feel like we just really didn't have enough time for that. I also, like being on virtual, it was so hard to kind of tell what was going on, to know who was speaking, and that kind of thing. And so it would be great if we kind of put in some kind of protocol where people are either introduce themselves, so we can, those of us who have to be virtual for one reason or another, can still get to know our fellow committee members.
Thank you. We'll work on that for next time. Anything else? Okay, great. Well, have a good night, everyone, and we will see you in November.
Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Bye.